think I only passed the subject of evidence at law school because somebody gave me a photocopied set of your notes. Now, the thing about Penny is that apart from having a mind like a steel trap and a sort of gnomic ability to condense tricky legal concepts into comprehensible sentences, she also had very neat handwriting.
That was a long time ago.
And I'm not sure if that's still the case, but those notes were a real prize. I didn't pay money for them, but I probably had to perform some service to obtain them. So look, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The fact that I now have a law degree, even though I rarely use it, it's like a new car, one lady driver, never backed out of the garage, is that you helped me indirectly without even knowing. So thank you for that.
I'm going to put that on my CV.
Please do.
Helped Annabel Crabb pass law.
I know it's on mine.
It was rugged at times. I had some great people in that community, but also some people who were not so good with diversity. We had the misfortune to live next to a woman who was possibly the worst bigot I've ever met.
Really?
I know, but it was kind of good. I peaked early. So
Why? What would she do?
Oh, she'd do graffiti. She'd abuse us
That's
as we
nice.
went out. You play outside, and she'd abuse us over the fence, and then she painted stuff on our driveway. I mean, I don't think she had a very happy life. So,
Right.
in hindsight, I can try and be a bit more compassionate about it than I probably was.
Can't you track her down and create some special legislation just for her?
Just for her.
I know you're not the vindictive type, so I guess the answer to that's probably no.
When Paul Keating was Prime Minister and he had been talking a lot about Australian identity and Australia's place in Asia, and he'd been talking about those national stories of identity, and that we should not only have Gallipoli as a national story of identity, but we should look to the Kokoda Trail and to the fall of Singapore. And for me, because when Singapore falling was such an important part of our family's story and history, that was really profound, him talking about that. And I remember flying back into Sydney, so this would have been before we had international flights here, I guess, maybe. And the wheels hitting the tarmac, and I remember thinking to myself, this is the first time this really feels like my country.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it was a profound moment, and it was because how he had been talking about who we were was so different, and it actually spoke to me.
So you felt as though you were included in that picture?
Absolutely.
No.
So it taught me a lot about inclusion and diversity, actually, and that politicians and religious and community and business leaders, we can't change people's hearts and minds all the time, but how you talk can have a profound effect on how people's sense of self and people's sense of identity. The story I think I've mentioned before to you was, I was working in New South Wales for a couple of years because I sort of went away from Adelaide, and what I observed there was politics of government close up, and I thought the takeaway observation was you didn't always get the outcome you wanted. You often disagreed with the outcome, but the outcome was almost invariably better for having good people in the room. And I thought, well, I want to be in the room. So for me, that was the decision to get involved in politics. Institutions are slow to change, particularly if there's no leadership from the top to change them. We've seen that in terms of women's participation in politics. I mean, women have been 50% of the population for a very long time, and we're still very underrepresented in our parliament. I remember when I first went into parliament, actually, and can I tell two stories, or would that be
Go for it. No.
I'll be quick.
We're all behind it.
One of the last, so I was a lawyer before I went into parliament, and one of the last cases I did was quite a sort of clunky case. We had a lot of evidence taken, and so we had to schedule it over a number of weeks to try and schedule time. It went for longer than people anticipated. And I remember preparing in the room before one of the day's hearing, and the instructing solicitor on the other side, so I was counsel for the worker and the instructing solicitor for the employer, was a young woman like me. So father was Malaysian Chinese. I think her mum was Anglo-Australian. And I realised, I thought, wow, this is the first time, other than the cleaner, that there's been anyone in any courtroom I've been in that looks like me. When I arrived in Parliament, and I remember saying to Mum, well, Mum, there's me, there's Zabin Chen, who was the
Victorian Senator.
Victorian Senator, I think Taiwanese background, and there was a woman in the library, and the cleaners and me. It was a really very, I suppose you had Greeks and Italians in the Parliament, but it was not what you'd call a really diverse Parliament. We still don't have as many Asian Australians in politics as I would like. What I would say is I think the second generation has got engaged in a different way. So when at a point where I was a minister, I had both of my press secretaries were Asian Australian, and quite a number of staff throughout the government at the time were. And I thought, well, that's great. What you're seeing is a shift in people's engagement with politics.
What do you remember about the international student body? I mean, presumably they were there to be a sector for your relentless empire building in terms of student elections.
I don't think so.
No, all right.
I don't think I'd make a general observation. So I think that it was a sort of heterogeneous student population. So some were more involved, some less so, in terms of campus life or... I just think for me and for the country, that sort of diversity of student population is a good thing. Like, I think it's not only, there's an obvious economic benefit to the nation, but for local students and having the experience of studying with and alongside international students, I think that can be a very creative process. Well, I think it's extraordinarily important, and it's important, as I said, not only economically. It's obviously our largest services export, and it's got enormous growth potential. But I think it's also important in terms of our own integration, or our own engagement with the region. Can I talk about it this way? If we look at the people who either studied on the Colombo Plan or people who've come to Australia and studied here and then gone back to whichever part of the region they're from, that's an enormously important potential resource for Australia. People who have hopefully not only knowledge of us but also reasonable goodwill towards us. Those partnerships are things we need to keep building on. But we should turn it around, as I said before, and also think about us. I mean, part of what Australia will increasingly need to do is become more Asia capable. We know, the globalisation of our economy will only continue, and so the more capability we can inculcate and foster in our own population. More capacity to work cross-culturally, more capacity for other language speaking. I think that they are intrinsically important economic and social resources for us. I think that one of the positive things that Simon's been talking about has been to not just talk about higher education as in terms of the universities, but also recognise the importance of reform and high quality in the vocational education sector. And it's sort of, you might not know, but Paul Keating talked about the Commonwealth taking over the vocational training over 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I think certainly it was talked about when he was Prime Minister, and he gave a speech, I think in 2001, where he talked about the same thing. Because you really do need to think both in terms of your domestic economy, but also I think in terms of quality offering, you need to think about both of those streams together. And we've been very fragmented as a nation in terms of how we look at vocational education and university education. We shouldn't just think of international students as an economic benefit. We have to make sure we position ourselves as providing the best quality offering both to them and to local students. And I think, that has to be one of the central objectives of any reform of post-secondary education.
What do you think about that differential between domestic students and international students? Is that an unbridgeable chasm when you have one student who's paying full fees and another who's being subsidised? Is that a kind of a cultural barrier that's difficult to cross, do you think? Does it necessarily create two classes of students?
Probably the people here would be able to answer that better. I mean, I think... I hope not. I mean, there are various policy reasons why that's always going to be the case, isn't it? I'd rather... But I think that any divide or any collaboration is not driven primarily, or should not be driven primarily by the fee-paying basis or non-fee-paying basis of the place, but by how you interact and the nature of the curriculum and the nature of engagement and collaboration in the classroom or lecture, theatre or whatever. The fiscal reality for the Commonwealth is you can't do much of what you want to do in education, mostly from a Labor government's perspective, both lifting quality, investing in research and also bringing more kids from disadvantaged background into university, unless you do find a way to equitably get some fee contribution from students. And the deferred scheme is about the best, most equitable way you can think of doing it. But I would say there's a philosophical point, I think, which arises here. Whilst this is an important export sector, and whilst we are offering a product, I think we do have to always remember what education is, okay? It's not just a commercial venture, okay? This is about, you are trying to enable people to be, not only acquire skills, gain insights, think about how to think, but you're actually trying to help them be the best of who they are. I mean, that's fundamentally what we try to do with education. And I think that kind of sense of it, of the ethical and philosophical core of education is something you shouldn't lose just because you have to worry about all of those, pesky things such as financing it. But we should remember what it's about. It changes lives. It transforms lives. I mean, you think about Dad, like my grandmother, didn't even finish primary school. She was barely literate. I got to be the Finance Minister of Australia, and the only difference is Dad went to university, first person in his family. And, we understand it is transformative for individuals, for families and for communities. So there is a social good that is at the heart of any education system, which I think always has to be recalled. We've had, let's be frank, Australia's history on race has not been great. When my parents married, the White Australia policy was still in place. We at times, I think one of my speeches to Parliament, I described it as we have had an uncomfortable relationship with race for much of our history. And I think one of the challenges of some of the public policy debates, and the most notable being asylum seekers, is not to have what is, and whatever your views on that, what is a very difficult public policy conundrum, fuse that with xenophobic sentiment. Being a politician and listening to some of what comes in, not everyone in Australia necessarily differentiates between the policy issue and that xenophobia which gets engendered. So you have to be very careful, I think, in politics to try and not tap that. I hope we've had 14 years of a debate about asylum seekers, whatever your views about the policy issue, but a debate which has been pretty hard. And I hope we can enter another phase in the conversation. The things that make me feel most optimistic are actually going to schools and universities. It's the best thing I do as a politician, because you get young people who are disarmingly honest, like they ask really hard questions, but they ask insightful questions, and they ask questions that are that really go to the heart of things that are important. In terms of our place in the region, I think we've got a lot more work to do, actually. So I'm optimistic because I think we're always capable of that, and because we have, we are the most successful multicultural nation in the world. We have enormous, extraordinary resources here, cultural resources, and we have good links via, whether it's international education or other relationships. So we've got a lot of things we can leverage off, but we do actually need to make sure we keep doing that.